everybody, this is Brian from Breaking Down Security. Just wanted to say hey, and that this is the second part of our interview with Guillaume Ross, and we're going to just go ahead and get right back into it now. Hope you enjoy the rest of the interview. So when companies enter into agreements with cloud providers, is it pretty cut and dried? I mean, does Amazon, say you want so much processor, so much X, Y, and Z for your EC2 instances. We're going to be responsible for making sure you have 100% available, or as much availability as possible. I don't want to say 100%.
Yeah.
But you're going to have to do your own patching. You're going to have to do your own log management. You're going to have to do your own connectivity type things. I mean,
yeah.
do they get into that kind of granularity in the contracts, or do they kind of expect companies to know what they're doing when they enter into agreements?
They have pretty good sets of roles and responsibilities. So if we take Amazon as an example, I don't know if you guys have show notes. I think you do. So, we could put the link in there to the AWS security best practices. And in there, they're really clear about you're using EC2. That means you're responsible for your data. You're responsible for managing the applications that you run there. You're responsible for managing anything that's related to client-side encryption, network traffic protection, doing your SSL, and so on. And what we will do is provide you with compute, storage, databases, networking, and availability. And EC2 is really like pure infrastructure as a service. I mean, they don't do much for you other than provide you with these VMs and services to manage them. Then if you use other services that like their identity management, then they do more. I mean, you're not the one who's going to be in charge of patching the identity management stuff, right? And they really define that pretty clearly for each one of their services. So that's the first thing you should look at before using one of these, because it's really important that you know what you're supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't know that, then some stuff is going to just fall through the cracks, and that's when you get into a pretty dangerous situation where you just assume stuff.
Sure. Well, I was just, I was thinking because, you've got, I mean, you see the Dilbert comics or something with the stereotypical pointy-headed boss, and he's like, hey, we should move everything to the cloud. And the IT guys are like, okay, let's just go ahead and get that. And, you might enter into an agreement that you're not fully understanding everything. And then, like
Exactly.
you said, you're going to get owned. Or, you're going to put your data up into the cloud and not realize, hey, we've got contractual obligations that make it so that our data cannot be residing on a data center in Germany or, in Jakarta, Indonesia. We're breaking contract with our current client because we are storing, medical health records in, Australia, for instance.
Yeah. Compliance, you really have to talk to your compliance team before you start storing data left and right. Because in some cases, it doesn't even matter what you could do with security. I mean, you just can't do it. Don't even waste time thinking about it. But at the same time, because you're compliant, we all know that doesn't mean that you're secure.
Oh, yeah. So is there a way, I mean, once you put your stuff up into the cloud,
yeah,
is there any way of knowing or having control of where the data is going to be stored? Do they have US only based data centers where, they say, oh yeah, your data is only going to be put onto these
mm-hmm.
Databases, or these databases or these data centers and these servers?
No, I see exactly what you mean. And if we take three different examples, so infrastructure as a service and all the Amazon services, they're split by regions. So you could easily say, I want my stuff to be in the US. And your stuff is going to be in the US. They're not going to automatically move it out of there. That's pretty clear. And that's actually one problem that I've had in the past, is that most of these providers don't have a Canadian data center yet.
Oh.
So if you have a client that has a bunch of compliance rules, and for whatever reason they're really strict about not storing data out of the country, well, let's just say that the cloud providers that we have available to us are not the market leaders.
Sure, sure. So you're talking like healthcare people or government entities?
Yeah, let's say government. I mean, that's a pretty big deal killer usually. Sometimes you can work around it by doing really good client-side encryption, but then again, that kills some types of use cases that you could do. Now, if we look at Microsoft with Azure, it's kind of similar to how Amazon does it. But in some cases, if you're using something like Google Apps, for example, the only thing that you know is that your stuff is always going to be in multiple, Google data centers,
Hmm.
and you have a list of data centers in countries. You can't prevent it from being in place X, Y, Z. I mean, if you're always connecting from the States, chances are your data is going to be in the States. But if you just go for a trip in Japan and start downloading all the files that you have in your Google Drive, well, then maybe it's just going to get replicated there. So you have to assume that it's going to end up there at some point.
Yeah, so the restrictions for connections even would be you don't want to be going over, like you said, to Japan and trying to pull stuff down onto Google Drive or uploading things to your Google Drive because it will upload to a Japanese version and then replicate,
Well,
say, to the American version.
I think if you're using that kind of service that replicates throughout multiple data centers in different countries, you have to assume that your stuff is going to end up everywhere and that you're okay with that, or don't use it. Don't try to make crazy workarounds and assume that, oh, well, if I never access the stuff from whatever country, it's not going to go there. Because first of all, you wouldn't be able to prove that, because you're never going to get, the kind of infrastructure access you would need to prove that. And you never know. I mean, what if they're doing a big maintenance and they just want to offload some computing to a different data center, even though it's physically further away? That could just really easily happen. So make sure you understand how your cloud provider works before you put stuff there. And if you can't control it, well, just assume that the worst case scenario is going to happen and deal with that, and you won't be surprised.
So, what do cloud providers do about client anonymity? Now, this can be a problem if, say, let's say they're offering services for free for like 10 days. You have a malwarean that can use that product and then distribute as malware, from the cloud. Like you said, if you haven't been attacked by Amazon, you're not looking.
You're
Or
not looking
someone
at
in
your
the
logs.
cloud.
You should probably
Yeah.
get someone to look at your logs.
But how are they handling that?
Well, one big problem with Amazon is stolen accounts, right?
Hmm.
I think as soon as you need to pay for a service, then the anonymity is gained by stealing someone else's account. And also keeping whatever trial periods shorter and not, with different limits and
Right.
so on. And software as a service is a kind of a different game because it's not as easy to just attack other people through, let's say you're using Evernote. You're not going to use Evernote to hack someone's SQL database. And if you are, that's going to make an awesome talk at Black Hat.
Right.
But infrastructure as a service is easy. I mean, it's just a VM that no one knows who you are and you have it and then you do whatever you want. But I think what's been happening with Amazon, and we saw that this winter when the Bitcoin price just went up super high, the Mount Gox thing and whatever. So
Hmm.
Bitcoin was like at $1,000. The other currencies like Litecoin and so on were, kind of riding on Bitcoin still. And these other currencies, that you can still mine them with GPUs. And Amazon offers GPU instances, and the pricing on them did not necessarily make it profitable to mine Litecoin on Amazon. But when you're not paying for it, then it's always profitable, right? If
Yeah.
it's not your credit card, that's in there. So
Yeah.
I think fraud is going to be a big deal for these providers. By fraud, I mean like stolen credit cards and so on. But also they gain a lot by monitoring your own accounts to spot stuff happening. And one really good example of that is I'm sure Rich Mogul from Sycorosis. He had a really good post about how he got his AWS keys stolen by someone who was doing
Oh yeah.
cloud mining.
Yep.
And a really interesting thing that Amazon did is they actually went and they searched and they found out where his key was leaked. And they sent him an email saying, hey, I think you might have put your AWS key in some public stuff in GitHub. You might think about not doing that.
Yeah. He put his
And
key inside of some code on his GitHub.
yeah, or
Yeah.
like a config file or
Yeah.
whatever. And
Right.
that's a common mistake. And you can see that Amazon goes above and beyond. I mean, it's not really Amazon's job to look at what you put in GitHub. And they could just be really, straight about it and say, well, it's your account. You just leaked it. So you got to pay for the computing and that's it. But I think that's not the image they want to project. And they don't want people to start being really scared of using this because they're going to end up with a, $50,000 bill. So I think they've been doing a really good job with that. I mean, there's no guarantees, right? Don't go leaking your keys because maybe one day you'll just be sick of crediting all that computing power. So I think fraud is a big deal. So they'll have to do a lot of monitoring. If they see a bunch of instances popping up, maybe monitor the traffic that's going through there, see if it's any different. But I think that affects the infrastructure as a service providers the most, platform as a service as well. And software as a service, well, it's like any online service, fraud is going to be a thing, but it's usually not going to lead to someone attacking someone else. It's more like, I just want to steal your service, like get free, whatever.
So you mentioned that in Canada, you don't have really a lot of choices for cloud service providers. What do you do for your clients that have to keep their data in country? Do you use private clouds or do you use co-locations like we do with Rackspace, or do they obviously have data centers, but is that really the only alternative they have up there?
Let's say they're really, really strict about keeping data in the country, and even using, client-side encryption, making sure the provider doesn't have access to the keys and so on is not enough. Then that means we can't use Amazon. That means we can't use Azure yet.
Sure.
That means we can't use Google. So what we're left with is like niche players. There's a few. Some of them will be based, let's say, on OpenStack. And that's like a key selling point for them being, hey, we use OpenStack, and of course we're not Amazon, so we don't have like billions of dollars to do R&D and add new features all the time. But we're right, across the street, so we're in Canada.
Yeah.
Though the most interesting aspect of using cloud services is often the features, because everyone's been fighting on price. The prices have been becoming really cheap, but the amount of stuff you can do on Amazon that you can't necessarily do with just a good old bunch of computers and maybe VMware and so on is amazing. So when you can't use that, sometimes it destroys a lot of the value, and you just end up, keeping your good old, internal virtualized stuff, and you wait a little longer and you find different use cases that maybe you can send to a different country. Because I think a lot of these smaller players, they won't be there for as long as the bigger ones. So you have to consider the risk that some of these will be gone in a few years, right? So that would mean a migration, which is it's a big risk. I mean, it's going to happen. You're going to see some of these small players just disappear, right?
Well, if they fill a niche, I mean, you like you said, in Canada, if they have to keep it in country and you don't have any alternative, I would think you're still going to have a few of those guys around, just or maybe they'll fit the deal of. We were thinking about doing a podcast in the near future about how small businesses would do business as securely as possible. Maybe the niche players would be more likely to help the small guys out with the smaller companies who can't afford or don't are maybe not as confident that Amazon will help them out because they're a small player. They'll take the local guy. They'll support local if you follow.
Well, that's always the reason that you're going with local companies is typically for better support, better communication, and so on. But it's the kind of market where you have to spend a lot of money to improve really fast. So it's hard for a 20 employee company to keep up with Amazon. I mean, Microsoft has issues keeping up with Amazon. And Microsoft is moving really fast too and improving. And the risk is, what if Amazon or Microsoft says, 2016, hey guys, we have this new, Montreal data center and we have a Vancouver data center. So if you need to keep your data in Canada, you can now do it in Amazon. Then all these small players, they just lost, one of their really big selling points. So I think there's going to be a pretty big market for third-party solutions that help with encryption, third-party solutions that help with security when using these big cloud providers, and that's probably going to be really interesting. But I think the trailblazers are going to be really hard to catch. I mean, look at all the other providers. They're not even a considerable fraction of Amazon right now. So for a small company, that's really, really hard. But some people are going to help other companies use the big ones securely. I mean, you could make money helping companies use things like Amazon or Azure more securely. Definitely, you can help your customers with that.
Do you think the small companies that are, if and when Amazon or Microsoft or one of the other big ones come in, do you think they would use them as they'd be like a reseller of Amazon cloud products, and they would kind of shift their model more towards like doing platform or software as a service, where they would maintain,
Yeah,
shift more to like an IT type of support kind of thing?
that is that's a good point, and it's already happening to some extent. Like Google has, I forget if they call them partners or resellers or whatever, but some people have a relationship with Google that allows them to resell Google Cloud services to their own customers. And the level of access that they have to these accounts is really from like invoicing and all that. Like they don't have actual infrastructure access to Google. That already exists. I'm not sure Amazon does that, and I'm not sure Microsoft does that, though I would guess Microsoft would do it because Microsoft has always been really good, with partners and resellers and so on. So that really seems like it would fit into Microsoft's business. Amazon, I'm not sure because Amazon's thing is you need stuff, you come to our website, you just put in a credit card and you got it. And obviously, if you need something way bigger than that, then there's going to be enterprise contracts and so on. But I don't think they're going to want to be pushing middleman because look at everything else that Amazon is doing not related to cloud. I mean, their core business is they really want to have good prices and sell directly to the customers.
Sure.
So
they don't want to sublet. They want to
Yeah.
they want to go directly to the big man without
Yeah,
having a cut being taken.
So I think for companies that want to have like a bigger relationship and partners and feel like someone's really going to help them use these providers, well, probably someone like Microsoft or maybe even IBM, because IBM has always been really good at getting into enterprise and selling stuff and doing these big contracts with a bunch of different services tied together. That's probably going to be a big, well, maybe not a big, but an interesting selling point for them.
Do you see companies moving to the cloud and then over time they kind of lose their ability to keep their whatever data infrastructure secure as new vulnerabilities come out, new attacks are known?
I don't think it makes that big of a difference if they're using the cloud or not, because if you're using infrastructure as a service, for example,
Yeah.
it's really similar to having your own stuff. I mean, it could be more elastic. You have good APIs to start up a bunch of new VMs and shut them down and manage them and secure them. But it's not because it's in the cloud that you should have more services just accessible over the internet. You should have a similar, if you exclude the cloud provider side and the hypervisor, your attack surface should be pretty similar. But because you're in the cloud, you probably have APIs that can help you do things faster. So I think you should be able to do vulnerability management better once you're in there. What could become dangerous is if you're not careful with change management. I mean, you could, in theory, just make a mistake on your edge firewall at work and just open like everything and let everything go through. But you probably have different zones and so on. So, and you have change management processes and so on to prevent that from happening. If you're in the cloud, sometimes it could be a little bit more dangerous. I mean, deleting a security group rule and then you're on the internet. I mean, the impact of a simple mistake could be bigger in some cases. So you really have to look at how to minimize that impact by using things like Amazon has VPC. You can use security groups. That doesn't mean you shouldn't also be using local firewalls on your servers. So you really have to think about that. But I don't think there's a big. I think you should be better at vulnerability management once you're using infrastructure as a service. And if you're using platform as a service, then you probably depend on your vendor. And if your vendor is not good at patch management and vulnerability management and is selling platform as a service, then that's your cue to maybe start looking elsewhere. And of course, everything that's related to the applications that you run there, I mean, they're still going to be as vulnerable in the cloud as on premises. I mean, if you have a bunch of web services, it doesn't make that big a difference.
What about securing the APIs? Is that a big deal?
Yeah. What prevents me from going to sleep at night sometimes is when you start thinking about what if someone steals the password to my admin account to one of these big services. Because, I mean, if you had domain admin on my domain, you could do pretty much anything, right? But maybe I would detect it. Maybe it would take you a long time before you could exfiltrate 10 terabytes of data. Maybe I would see some traffic. Maybe I would ignore a bunch of alerts and you would still manage to do it. But in the cloud, I mean, it could happen so fast. Imagine I'm storing a bunch of stuff on Amazon and I work day to day with my account and I don't, I do common stuff that a lot of people do. I mean, I just log in with my admin account. I don't necessarily have two-factor authentication enabled. I don't necessarily have single sign-on enabled. Use still my password. How many minutes is it going to take you to just copy all of my data to a different Amazon account? And from there, you can exfiltrate it elsewhere. Or maybe you could just make my data public and start downloading it from elsewhere and I might not notice. So that's kind of scary. And so you really have to manage to protect your management plane really, really well, because these are the keys to the kingdom. And I think in enterprise, we already had a situation that was similar to that. People protect their data centers really well physically. I mean, you got guards and I don't know, do they have guns or tasers or whatever?
Big fences and barbed wire. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a CISSP, then you know everything about fences, right?
Yeah.
Of course. Guards are awesome.
But then you have, let's say, VMware, and you're using vCenter, and then you have a bunch of guys who are your VMware admins that with a few clicks could just download all of your VMs to their laptop and boot them at home.
Sure.
And that gets back to segregation of duty, right? I mean, it doesn't make sense that one guy could download like all of your servers and just boot them at home. So you would need to do a really good job at protecting vCenter. Well, now it's the same issue, except your vCenter is internet accessible because it's just the Amazon console or the Google Apps admin console or the Azure console. So you have to be really good about managing it. And for those that do provide logs, you really should be integrating these logs with your existing monitoring solutions. And you should be really, really interested in whatever alert is generated from that, because it could happen really, really fast. So there's the obvious stuff that you should be doing. If you're using Amazon, or Azure as well, I mean, they do provide two-factor authentication for free.
Good. Okay.
So if you're not using any like more complex setup with single sign-on and so on, I mean, yeah, you should definitely be using single sign-on, two-factor authentication. You have no excuse not to do that.
So what's the two-factor auth? Do they send you an SMS text, or do you have like a soft token kind of thing like Google Auth? Or
yeah, that depends on the provider. But Amazon, for example, works exactly like Google, Microsoft as well. So you could just use the Google Authenticator on your iPhone to use that, or the Duo security app that supports that same protocol as well. And that works well. But then there's a few, like that's the easy thing. I mean, it's just a checkbox and an app that you installed. You don't really have a reason not to use that. But then if you're using something like, let's say I use Google Apps for my own email account with my own domain and so on, that has recovery options. Well, how long ago did you set up these recovery emails and what guy does it go to? So if someone was attacking me and they know that, I don't know, my recovery email is set to go to my boss, then they could, try to do phishing on my boss to get his account, then do a recovery, and then take over the whole apps that I have. So be really careful with your recovery options. Be really careful with your authentication options. And then there's the common stuff that we're getting better at doing internally in like infrastructure security, but that we don't necessarily do in the cloud, especially because sometimes people who use the cloud are startups, they have a new product and they have, other concerns than security at first, like, making money. Segregation of duty and least privilege. If you just go and give complete admin access to your Amazon account, nothing's going to save you because you're only one phished account from total disaster. And even if you're using two-factor authentication, I mean, I could still steal your session. I could, still do a bunch of stuff. So there's no magic bullet. So make sure that you only give people the strict minimum amount of rights that they need. And when I say people, that's I also mean machines and service accounts and generic
Yeah.
accounts.
Sure.
Be really, really careful with the amount of permissions that you give those, because if they leak, they could typically be used over the internet. So you don't have like a firewall really protecting you from the API, at least. I mean, you can protect your VMs, but the Amazon API is not really going to be firewall. Some vendors, they provide a way to whitelist IP addresses for API calls. So you could say, okay, for my account, API calls should only be coming from, I don't know, these ranges or so on. That is not super common. And even if you had that, it goes back to saying, okay, well, it's just from the internal network or whatever, but what's the internal network? I mean, you're only one compromised desktop away from being internet accessible. So it's a little worse than if it was internal. Things can happen faster, but we should already be thinking like that for our internal stuff. It just multiplies the speed and the impact.
Got any other questions, Mr. Betcher?
Let's see. I was kind of confused on how, like, say you do infrastructure as a service, what kind of network platform is there, or what does your network look like?
Okay.
Can you like, if you, I don't know,
Is
can
it
you
like
see other
virtual hosting?
traffic
Yeah.
going
Yeah, well, how
across?
do you get, let's say, from your existing data center to whatever you're setting up in infrastructure as a service?
No, like say you have an entire like a application database,
Yeah.
Thing going on. How do you have a virtual firewall going on? I don't know how that works.
Okay. Well, I think the best example we can use to answer that question is what Amazon is doing, because it's probably the one that's the most usable right now.
Okay.
So Amazon Infrastructure as a Service has EC2, and EC2 has something called security groups. Security groups, one mistake that people make sometimes is to think of them as subnets or VLANs or like a bucket of machines.
Sure.
So if I say I have a security group called web servers, some people will think it means that all my web servers that are in there can see each other.
Mhm.
But that's not really how it works. The security group is applied to each machine separately. And now they have something called VPC for virtual private computing, I think. I should probably know my acronyms better. So, and with VPC, what they added is a bunch of features to do internal IP addressing and then gateways and things like that, as well as egress filtering. So it's really nice because it's pretty granular, and what it gives you is the ability to protect the network or the firewall configuration of VMs, but outside of the VM. So I could give you the right, let's say you're a network guy, and I could give you the right to manage my security groups. And each security group is going to apply to the machines that are in it. So for example, if you say security group web servers can only receive traffic on port 443 and can only send traffic out to, I don't know, port 443 on whatever, Debian update repository that you have. So that's going to apply to each of these servers, and none of the administrators of these servers can change that. So you could be a sysadmin there and you can't do anything about that, but at the same time, you're the network guy and you don't even have to have any kind of access to the machine to be setting that up. So in that sense, it's much more flexible than something like a local firewall, like the Windows firewall or IP tables. So you can use both. But if you were using IP tables and I compromise the machine and I get root, I mean, I could just do egress to whatever. So this is an interesting layer. So if you're using VPC, then you can, build your network really similar to what your internal network would look like, private subnets and everything. And then you can set up gateways, and all these security groups will control the traffic flow. Azure is similar. They have something that they call, I think they just call it endpoints. It's not as granular, but it's the same basic idea, and I'm sure they're going to make it more granular as time goes on. So when you have a brand new Windows machine in Azure, they won't just, leave it open to the internet. They're going to ask you, like, do you have a web endpoint there? And then they're just going to open that. Or maybe if you are feeling a little bit reckless, you're just going to open up RDP. And then you can specify firewall rules that go with that. And all these rules are controlled at the API level.
That's fascinating. Man, that is so freaking complicated sounding.
Yeah, but it's one of the places where you have some security features in the cloud that are nice to have and that are better than some of the stuff that we can do on site, excluding if you're using the internal cloud platforms. But I mean, so there's some risks that are bigger than when you're in the cloud, but you can also address some stuff a little better with that.
Now, do you see cloud providers giving their clients more I know you mentioned increased logging. Do you see that trend now that way, they give the clients more so that they can better do like intrusion detection and that on their services?
Yes, in the last few years, there's more information that's available there. There's more ways you can, for example, Amazon now has and has had for over a year IAM roles to limit the level of access that each of your machines can have. You have logs for API access. Google has similar stuff. They have logs for, let's say, Google Docs. You can see who modified your documents, who read your documents, and so on. That did not exist, I think, even 2 years ago. So there's that. And most of this stuff, you can usually query that through their API. So it wouldn't be that hard to, make something custom to just get that and import it to your server.
Yeah.
Where it gets a little more tricky is, the lower level stuff. So if your infrastructure is a service, at least your VMs, you can get your stuff. But they won't really give you the logs that are like one level above your infrastructure level. Like, for example, Microsoft has SQL Azure. I think they changed the naming recently, so I'll make this really clear. They have one thing, which is you have VMs and you install Microsoft SQL Server in them and you do everything. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the managed SQL database. So you just pay for a database and you pay for, let's say, 500 gigs and whatever amount of transactions that you need. And as of 6 months ago, I didn't check since then, and these things improve pretty fast sometimes, but the database was running on some kind of Microsoft SQL Server instance that was customized for Azure. And there's some logs that I was really interested in getting there that I could not get because these logs are at the instance level, and you're not root on that instance. You don't have the SA account to that. You only have access to your database. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, Microsoft can't really easily give you these logs because how many other customers are on the same instance?
They're all jumbled. It's hard to parse out yours and somebody else's.
Yeah. So I think one of the reasons they couldn't give these logs out is the platform is still probably pretty close to what the standard Microsoft SQL was. But as they make it more and more into a cloud native platform, they will end up with ways of giving you, only your stuff, but even at the instance level. But there's a bunch of things like that they need to improve. And it's moving fast, but it's never perfect. So every time there's a new feature, you think, okay, yeah, we fixed this and that, and then it would be great if we could just fix that. But it's still pretty new and it's improving really fast. So I think we're going to get there.
All right.
Awesome. Wow. That was just strap a jetpack to you because you're going straight to Cloud Town. I've learned more in the past, hour and, we're going to try to split this up into 2 podcasts, obviously, but man, that was definitely a crash course in understanding cloud computing, and I appreciate it. So, wow, we appreciate you being here, Guillaume. We learned quite a bit. Hopefully,
that was useful to you and to every listener.
So, how can we find you? We don't want to do you work for a company that we could mention maybe perhaps, or
Well, right now I'm doing consulting in the financial industry, and you can find me on Twitter. I'm Geppetto42, 1P and 1T, which is not the proper spelling for Geppetto.
okay.
Long story. Or you can find me on binaryfactory.ca. I have a blog there, not updated that frequently. And there's a bunch of ways to contact me there if you have any cloud-related questions or complaints.
So I guess that was it. So this was Guillaume and Brian for Breaking Down Security. I hope you've enjoyed it. You can find Mr. Betcher at Betcher Pwned. He's actually getting more followers and being followed quite a bit. I appreciate that for him. You can find me at Brian Break. That's Bryan, the proper way of spelling Brian. And we're on there quite often. If you want to leave feedback, by all means, please do. And we hope you come back next week and listen to more Breaking Down Security. You have a great week.